Welcome to the next shir, the next lecture on Rambam Mor Nevuchim. We are up to part 1, chapter 29, which in the Pines translation is page 62 in volume 1. Today I want to try to cover 3 chapters today, so we cover some ground. I started preparing another topic to discuss in Rambam, but this week I want to just do 3 chapters because they're, especially the third one is extremely interesting, but we'll find gems in the first 2 as well. So chapter 29. Here, Rambam continues to analyze different words. So the first word he's discussing is the word etzev, ayin sadivet, which means it's often used to mean sadness, or could mean sorrow, or something along those lines. Or sometimes it could mean regret. But it's a term. The actual meaning of the term, Rambam says, is denoting pain and aching. It's a reference to that sensation of pain in one's heart. For example, the etzev tel dibanim, where God says about women in general, with pain they will give birth to children. Who shame hakas, and often it means, it's referring to the anger that one feels. So it means sadness, but it also means anger, which often dovetails after. And Rambam, and as we've noticed in every time he analyzes the word, he says what it basically means, and then kind of it's what it came to also mean, and it's usually kind of comes out, each thing comes out of one, and then from there it meant something else, and from there it meant something else. So he's doing the same thing here as usual, and pain often leads to anger. So, for example, where it says velo atzavo aviv miyamav, and his father had not caused him to be sorry at any time, which means that he had not angered him over there. That's referring to, or sorry, for he was sorrowful for the sake of David. That is ki ne'etzav el David. That's referring to Shaul, to Saul, and his anger at David. So his ne'etzav, and it uses the language of etzev, ragaz biglolo. I know I'm skipping back and forth from the Hebrew kapach to the English, but he was angry for his sake. That's the Pines. And so then it also means disobedience, contrariety and disobedience. Meri and mered is the Hebrew, so rebelliousness. So when it says, for example, where it says they rebelled and caused sorrow to his Holy Spirit, there it's talking about, it uses va'atzavo et ruach kadsho. So there it's referring to, Isaiah is talking about the people that rebelled against God, or yatziveu b'yishimon, the same thing. Imderech atzav bi. So you see the English translations there. So in accordance with the second or third sense, the anger. Okay, so now he's going to flip. So now when we use this term etzev regarding God, it then would sound like it means that God gets angry, or God gets sad, which of course is difficult, because Rambam is trying to teach us not to attribute actual emotions to God. So that's the reason why he's dealing with this word. So, but he just said in his third meaning, it means rebelliousness against, doing something against. In accordance with the second and third sense, it means he sorrowed unto his heart. When it said regarding God, vayitz atzev el libo, that he felt etzev, he felt atzvut in his heart, the simple translation is that in God's heart, as if he had one, he felt sad or sorrowful. He felt upset. That specific verse is talking about before the flood, right? God was upset about how the people were not behaving themselves. So, that's obviously difficult. But he says in the last one, it means, if you look at the second meaning of the word, which Rambam said is referring to anger, right? The interpretation of the verse would be that God was angry with them because of their evil action. As for scripture saying unto his heart, it uses a similar expression in the story of Noach. It said, and God said to his heart. So listen, so Rambam says, here its meaning, listen to this. Let me explain this to you. The matter with regard to which it is said, a man that he said in his heart. When we talk about a person saying something in his heart, right? or said unto his heart. What does that mean? That means something which a person doesn't speak to anyone else. When it says God had it in his heart, so the first thing Rambam needs to explain to us is, what does it mean in his heart? Obviously, God doesn't have a heart, so what does it mean when it says that? So he says, when we say a person said something to his heart, we find often in the Torah that phrase, and it means he said it to himself, meaning it's something that he thought. He didn't speak out to others. Similarly, it is said of every manner willed by God, of which he does not speak to a prophet. So when God, so to speak, says something, in other words, there's a message that is given in the Torah, but wasn't delivered to any people. There was no prophet that received that message. The people didn't receive that message. So that is so at a time when he accomplished an act corresponding to his will in this regard, God does something without forewarning, without telling us this is what's going to happen. So that's what it means when it said God said unto his heart. So Rambam says again, it doesn't mean that God said something to himself. It just means that God did something in this world without telling us beforehand, without warning us beforehand. It is thus likened to the human matter and virtue of the continual use of the rule. The Torah speaketh in the language of the sons of man. So just like we talk about human beings that way, we talk about God that way too. This is clear and manifest. It's obvious. Inasmuch as it is not made clear in the Torah with regard to the disobedience of the generation of flood, that an envoy of God was sent to them at that time, it doesn't say that God sent any messengers to the people of the world, which is an interesting question in and of itself. We know of the Medrash, we know of the story of the tradition that Noah was told to build the ark, and it took him 40 years to build the ark. And those 40 years, the Talmud and the rabbis say, was a war. People came and asked, what are you building? And he said, God's going to destroy the world. And people laughed, whatever. But that's not written in the actual text. In the actual text, the story is said in such a way that God didn't warn the world. There is no record in the actual text of God warning people to be better, right? So why that is, I think, is beyond the scope, would be an interesting topic to discuss, but it's beyond the scope of this discussion. But the fact that that's the case, that God didn't warn the people that it's going to happen, Rambam says that's what the pasuk meant, the verse meant when it said, and God said something to his heart, meaning for whatever reason and whatever lessons we're going to learn from that, God did not warn people. He didn't send a prophet to tell them, repent, be better, nor that the prohibitions were imposed on them and that they were threatened with destruction, right? It is said that God was angry with them in his heart, because that's the case, okay? So similarly, in regard to his will, that there should not be another flood. Later on, when it said that I will not destroy the world again, he didn't say to a prophet at that time, go and inform them of this. For this reason, it says unto his heart. And for the interpret, and what about the word sorrow? He was etzev elibo. Okay, so I explained the elibo part. The elibo part was that God didn't warn, he didn't say. But what's the atzvut? What's this anger, sorrow / rebelliousness? Those were the three translations of the word. So that is referring to the words atzev, sorrow, in its third sense, meaning man went contrary to the will of God regarding him. There, Rambam chooses the third one, since it's impossible to attribute an emotion to God. So Rambam therefore chooses the third translation, which is rebelliousness. Vayisatzev elibo then means, according to Rambam, it then means, and the people angered God, and God took it to heart, meaning he kept it to himself without speaking it to the people. So that would be Rambam's translation of that verse. The people were evil. They rebelled against God. Vayisatzev, they were rebellious. Elibo, and God took it in his heart, meaning he didn't tell us about it. He didn't tell the world. He didn't warn them. He just decided to destroy the world. For the term heart is also used to designate the will, as we shall make clear when we talk about the word heart later. Okay. And chapter 39, we'll get there together. So that is Rambam's analysis of the word etzev, and also a little bit a taste of what he's going to say when he talks about the word heart, when it refers to God. So the next chapter talks about the word achal, le'echol, which literally means to eat. But before I go there, are there any questions or comments about Rambam's analysis of what the word etzev means? Does anyone have any interesting observations about Noach about why God didn't warn the people. If anyone heard any interesting approaches, I'd be interested to hear them. If not, we'll go on. All right. Then I'm going to go on to achal, okay, lechol. And if you do think of something, feel free to jump in and raise your hand or say something. It's all good. So the next term that Rambam now analyzes is lechol, right? Achal, which achal, we most, even someone that learned 3 classes in beginner's Hebrew, right? Like how to order something at a restaurant knows the word achal means to eat, right? So the first meaning given to this word in the Hebrew language means eating of food by living beings. It's an animal takes food and it eats it. Okay. This does not require an example. It's obvious. Okay. Subsequently, the Hebrew language saw 2 notions in the action of eating, right? And the Hebrew language, is as if it was an entity, right? A being, saw two ways to go. What happens when you eat? One is you destroy that thing which you're eating, right? Whatever it is that you're eating becomes destroyed, right? It's so that's obvious. I mean, the corruption of its form that first takes place. So that's one thing that happens. But there's another thing. So in other words, so that's like a destructive idea. It looked like a nice slice of pizza, and now it's mush inside your stomach, right? The other notion is the growth of the living being due to the food that he takes. And that's the opposite. In other words, but then when you eat, you sustain a body. That's something nice. That's something very productive, right? So the act of eating is both destructive and productive, depending on the perspective that you take. The continuance of his life due to it, the person now is able to live longer, and the duration of the existence, as well as the good condition of all the forces of the body. He gets strength, he gets health, he builds up his muscles, his bones, etc., etc. In accordance with the first notion, the term eating is applied to all destruction and undoing. So thus, you have many cases where, for example, v'achla etchem eretz oivechem, right? The land of your enemies shall eat you up. This is in one of the curses in the Torah. Oh, Eretz ochelet yoshvea. People will look at the land of Israel when the people don't act properly and God decrees the destruction. It will say it's a land which eats up. I'm sorry, Eretz ochelet yoshvea is actually it's how the spies referred to the land, and they wanted to portray it in a negative way. They said it's a land that eats. It's those that inhabit it, right? So it's ochelet yoshvea, or cherev tu'uklu, or the sword will destroy you, etc. These are examples where you see that the word, and you can read the examples yourself. I'm on page 63 in chapter 30 in the middle in the pines, which means that he destroys those who disobey him as the fire destroys that which is in his power. So the use of this word is frequently. So often the word le'echol or achal is used to mean destruction. So obviously you're going to think now, in other words, so it doesn't mean, if you ever see this in reference to God and God punishing, right, it doesn't mean that God eats anything. I know it kind of sounds silly to us, but Rambam is being very careful here, because remember, there were many people then that thought of this in a very anthropomorphic way. And from a pagan's perspective, gods actually do eat, right? I mean, maybe not the way we eat with mouths and teeth, or maybe even that. But remember, from a pagan perspective, when their gods destroyed or took sacrifices, their gods were actually consuming, right? So one could imagine God consuming, and Rambam is being careful to teach us that that's not how it works. When it said, it just means God destroys, right? Okay. In accordance with the last notion, the term eating is applied. Okay, but then so that's the first explanation of the word le'echol. The second explanation of the word le'echol is as something. Is the sustenance and the growth that's gained by the act of eating, right? By the one who is doing the eating. So then it's applied figuratively to knowledge and learning and in general intellectual apprehensions through which the permanence of the human form endures in the most perfect of states. So here often you find eating, and the Rambam will also say drinking in a minute, are things that sustain us. So we refer that to knowledge, things that we gain, intellect. And then he gives us several examples for that. Come ye buy and eat, hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good. And he goes on and on. It is not good to eat too much honey, My son, eat honey, for it is good, and so on. These are all verses. Those are the last two are from Proverbs, from Mishlei, and it's clearly a reference to the you eating the honeycomb, and so your wisdom, you'll gain wisdom for your soul. So the eating of the honey is a reference, is an analogy, a poetic analogy to the wisdom we gain by studying knowledge. So this use is also frequent in the speech. It's not just in the Torah, but it's also in the words of Chazal and the sages of the rabbis. I mean the designation of knowledge as eating, that they often referred to eating as accumulating knowledge. So one example is this is a translation from the Aramaic, and the Aramaic reads Ta ichlu bisra shmeina beiraba, which literally translates come eat fat meat at the house of Rabbah, which is basically saying go to the teacher Rabbah, the rabbi named Rabbah, and go and learn from him, study from him, and it was referred to as eating fat meat. So are all eating and drinking referred to in this book signify wisdom exclusively, right? It's referring to chachma. That's from the Medrash on Kohelet. So again, it's the same idea, and that reference that I just said from the Medrash on Kohelet is explaining Ecclesiastes, the book of Kohelet, and saying that every time the book talks about eating and drinking, it's referring to gaining knowledge. And similarly, they often designate knowledge as water. So this is again the famous verse: whoever is thirsty, go to the water to drink. Right, which obviously is not giving you instructions that you should drink when you're thirsty. It's telling you that if you're thirsty for knowledge, go to the Torah and drink from the fountain of the Torah's knowledge. And in as much as this use has become so frequent and widespread in the Hebrew language, it has become, as it were, the first meaning. It's almost as if eating and drinking is the primary word, even though the primary meaning of those terms are actually eating and drinking. And the words meaning hunger and thirst are likewise employed to designate a lack of knowledge and of apprehension. One hungers for things, we say often, I thirst for knowledge. It became a very basic meaning. So thus, I will send the famous verse, lo rav lo lechem, it won't be a hunger for bread. This is from Amos, from the book of Amos, right? Lo tzama lamayim, it won't be thirst for water. Kiim l'shmoa et divrei Hashem, rather there will be a hunger and a thirst to hear the words of God. Or tzama nafshi le'elokim l'kelchai, my soul thirsts for God, to the living God. And there's many such references. And Rambam doesn't need to give more. Those are some of the more famous, more obvious ones. The Targum Yonasan ben Uziel alav hashalom also says, in other words, "Usha'avtem mayim b'soson mima'ayne hayeshua," from the verse of and you will. How does he translate it? I will. With joy shall ye draw water out of the wells of salvation. It's a famous verse. It pops up in the liturgy in the Siddur many times. Most famously before Havdalah and on after Shabbat, but it happened. We say this verse all the time. So it's not referring to actual drawing of water from a well. It's the reference to, as the Targum, as the translation of Yonasan ben Uziel into Aramaic says, utikablun. I'm reading from the Aramaic now. Utikablun upan chadat bechedva mi bechirei tzidka. Right, and you will, with joy, you will receive new teachings from the chosen teachings. That's my added word, of the righteous. That's how he says, what does it mean, Ma'aneh HaYeshua, the wells of deliverance? He translates as the chosen of the righteous ones. His Bonain, Rambam says, you should consider accordingly, that he interprets the word water as being the knowledge that will be received. So water is the reference to the knowledge. He takes the Hebrew word for wells, Ma'aneh, right, which means a well or a spring, to be the equivalent of Me'eneh Ha'eda, which is a word that means the notables, the leaders, the scholars, right? So and remember, Rambam heavily complimented the Targum, the translation of Onkelos, but he also had a backhanded comment a few chapters ago. We studied together to Yonasan ben Uziel, which is another Aramaic translation of the Torah, and here Rambam is praising the Targum of Yonasan ben Uziel. So he's not he's complimenting both. He likes both of them. So, I mean, the notables are meta-knowledge, and he says, from the chosen of the righteous, as righteousness is true salvation. That's what, I mean, my Shavta my Masasa, and you will draw knowledge and joy from the great leaders and the great scholars that have that knowledge to teach. So see accordingly how he interprets every word in this verse as a view to the notion of knowledge and learning understanding. So again, the point made over and over again through the Chazal and through the Targum and so on, that the water is not referring to real water, and eating and drinking is referring to gaining knowledge. Okay, so that would be Rambam's explanation of the word achal. So we went through etzev, which is sadness, and we went through eating. Anyone want to say something about either of those two topics before I go on to the next chapter, where Rambam, in his characteristic way, is going to go off on a little tangent again before he gets back to translating more words. The tangent is going to be a bit fun and extremely instructive to us nowadays, and you'll see why I say that soon. But before I do that, what about any comments about what we've studied so far, or questions or anything? Okay, I guess it was very clear, so I'll take it that way.
No, now the suspense. We don't want to keep you from the punchline.
To try. Okay, because I've been building up to this last chapter. It better live up to my suspense building words. So let's hit chapter 31. So it starts off with some observations. They sound a little bit up there in the sky, but then he comes right down to earth. So we'll see. You should know. And I'll try to go more in the English in the Pines. I don't know which one I like better, so I just fly back and forth. Know that the human intellect has objects of apprehension. So there are things that we can understand, and think about this. There's two things Rambam is going to be talking about here. There's human intellect in general, and there's the specific intellect of each person, right? So right now, just think of ourselves for a moment. We each have a brain, and our brain has a certain power to apprehend, to understand, to comprehend certain things. On the other hand, in that which exists, there are also existence and matters that, according to its nature, it is not capable of apprehending in any way or through any cause. There are certain things that our brains simply don't get. This is true on a level of all humanity. There are certain things that are just beyond our grasp. Most specifically, in Rambam's mind, a grasp of an understanding of God, right? That is, by its very definition, something that we can't get. But then there's other things that we can't get, maybe based on our abilities. I did okay enough in math, but there's certain things that I just can't do. To some extent, maybe training and learning and studying can get me better, but it might not get me all the way to the same level as Einstein or a PhD mathematician. Okay, but so there are also things there exist things which the intellect may apprehend in one state, but not being cognizant of other states. So like we may be able to apprehend, and here he's using the word apprehend instead of comprehend. So I kind of went a little off in the wrong direction when I use comprehend, because comprehend gives you the idea that you can't understand it. Apprehend doesn't mean so much that you can't understand it, but you can't see it or perceive it, right? So the fact that it apprehends does not entail the conclusion that it can apprehend all things, right? So in other words, I can see certain things, like before the Webb telescope that's right now sending back incredible pictures of the far reaches of space, we had no way of seeing certain distance out there. We can imagine things, we can calculate things, but we couldn't actually see it, right? There's a limit to how far we can see, right? So we can see up to here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can see up to there, because that's farther away, right? So just as the senses have apprehensions, but it is not within their power to apprehend at whatever distance the objects of apprehension may happen to be. So I could smell the flower that's in front of me, but I might not be able to smell a flower that's a mile away or 10 miles away. Similarly, with regard to all other bodily faculties, right? Even when I'm not talking about the intellect, the fact that a man is able to carry 200 weights, that's not 200 weights. That's 100 weight is an entity that Rambam was familiar with. A person that can carry 2 of those 100 weights and whatever weight they used in his time, I don't know what that was, does not mean he's able to carry 10 100 weights, right? A person's this guy, he's so strong that he can carry this, but it doesn't mean he can carry that. The difference in capacity existing between the individuals of the species with regard to sensory apprehensions and all the other bodily functions is manifest and clear to all men. Everyone can understand this idea, right? I can understand a certain amount. I can apprehend a certain amount. I can smell a certain amount. I can taste a certain amount. And you might have in some of those faculties more things than me and some of them less than me, but we each have our limitations. We can go up to here and not farther. However, it has a limit in as much as these capacities cannot attain to every distance, however far away, nor to every degree, however great it may happen to be. So we can get up to a certain point, but not farther. The identical rule obtains with regard to intellectual apprehensions. Just like it's true about our physical strength and our senses, it's also true about our intellect. There are great differences in capacity between individuals of species, right? You and I have different abilities and understandings in different areas and so on. It may thus happen that whereas one individual discovers a certain notion by himself through speculation, one person can experiment. Einstein could come up with a theory of relativity. Could someone, Helene Reisler is trying to call me. I'm assuming that it means that she's trying to log in. If someone can offline contact her and give her instructions how to log in, that would probably be helpful and help her get online. I don't want to stop the lecture and talk to her, but if there's anyone out there for Helene Reisler who can just contact her and give her instructions, that would be really nice. Even if it were explained to a person for a long time, but then there's another guy who'll never understand it. You could explain to me the theory of relativity 1,000 times, and I might get a little glimpses here and there, but I'll never really get it, right? It's just not within my ability. Even if you explain to him for a long time by means of every sort of expression and parable, his mind would not penetrate to it in any way, but would turn back without understanding. The guy is still going to turn away and not understand it. Now, whether that's because of an innate problem or a lack of education, Rambam is not dealing with here, but it happens to be true that there are certain people that just won't understand certain things. This difference in capacity is likewise not infinite. For man's intellect indubitably has a limit at which it stops, right? There are therefore things regarding which it has become clear to a man that it is impossible to apprehend them, right? There are things that a person might get to the point in his life or in his search that, you know what, I'm never, ever going to get that far. I can understand this much, but I'm never going to understand the rest. I'm never going to get it. And he will not find that his soul longs for the knowledge of them. Once a person comes to that state of mind when he realizes that a certain thing is beyond his or her ability, at that point, the person no longer desires to and longs for that knowledge. Now, here's the key, and the key to understanding the rest of this chapter. Rambam is going to tell us that we as human beings have an innate desire, an innate urge and need to try to fulfill our capacity and to study, to learn, to gain knowledge of the things that we are capable of understanding. But we don't have that innate drive to understand and learn things that are, by definition, beyond our ability. Once we know that that's something that we can't achieve, we no longer have any drive or desire to achieve that. So we have to at least think that it's possible for me to get there. Then we have a drive. Once you know it's impossible to get there, no longer is there such a drive. And he will not find that his soul longs for knowledge of them, inasmuch as he is aware of the impossibility of such knowledge, and of there being no gate through which one might enter in order to attain it. Of this nature is our ignorance, for example, of the number of the stars of heaven. So this is something in those days they wondered, how many stars are there really? Is it 1,764,902, 800 trillion? What's the exact number, right? And whether that number is an even number or an odd number. And Rambam says that's something that we know we simply cannot ever know. And even today, we get the Webb telescope, we can see trillions upon trillions, not just stars, but galaxies, each one with trillions of stars. But No one is going to sit down and tell you that I can't get to sleep tonight because I need to know exactly how many stars there are. And I'm not going to sleep until I find out. No one's going to say that unless someone's like crazy, but they're not going to say that because they know that no matter how much we see, no matter how much we learn, we're never going to know the exact number of stars. It's just not something that's we're never going to come up with, right? As well as the ignorance of the number of species of living beings. Exactly how many species are there on the planet? Well, every year we discover a bunch, and unfortunately, too many more goes extinct. So you're never going to know exactly how much, right? Or how many minerals are there, or plants, how many exactly, or even how many leaves are on that tree. You and I are not going to lose sleep tonight because we don't know exactly how many leaves are on just a single tree in front of our house, right? And other similar things. On the other, so we don't long for that knowledge because it's knowledge we know we'll never attain, so we don't care. On the other hand, there are things for the apprehension of which man will find that he has a great longing. Now, I want to point out here that underlying everything Rambam is saying is that we have an innate desire to achieve knowledge that we can achieve, and this is the drive that causes human beings to constantly desire to learn more and gain more knowledge. This is very important. The sway of the intellect endeavoring to seek for and to investigate the true reality exists at every time and in every group of men engaged in speculation. When human beings get together and talk and discuss, right? This is what drives human history forever, for always, in every context, Rambam says, right? This is what, when we all get together, we get together to study, to learn, to discuss, because we have an innate desire to find out more. This is a very important observation. With regard to such things, there's a multiplicity of opinions. And once we enter these kinds of discussions, we find that there's lots of different opinions about what it is. Is it this? Is it that? And we argue, we debate, we discuss, and then disagreement arises between men engaged in speculation. We sit around the table and we decide we're going to talk about a subject. And all of a sudden, one person says one thing, another person says another person says another. This is that drive that we have to get to the truth. Doubts crop up, and then one person says, well, what he said, is it really true? Maybe it's not, so on. All of this, why? Because the intellect is attached to an apprehension of these things, because our minds know, right, that we want to achieve apprehension of this issue, whatever the issue might be. I mean to say, because of its longing for them, and also because everyone thinks he has found a way by means of which he will know the true reality of the matter. Each person thinks, if I continue to follow this method of questioning, if I take this theory and apply it here and apply it here, eventually I'm going to get to the end and understand exactly what's going on. Now, it is not within the power of the human intellect to give a demonstration of these matters. I can't prove to you necessarily, right, that this is what's driving us, but it is. For in all things whose true reality is known through demonstration. However, in things which are completely obvious, right? For example, I'm sitting at a table right now. It's a table, right? So the true reality is known because I can tell you the table has 4 legs and a top and makes it a table. This has 4 legs, it's a table, right? So there is no tug of war. There is no debate about those kind of things. There's no drive or longing to identify the things that are obvious that everyone knows. There is a drive and a longing to identify the things that everyone doesn't know. And no refusal to accept a thing that's proven, right? Once a fact is proven, once there's a known fact, right, then there is no more drive to argue, and no one will get up and deny that fact, unless, indeed, such refusal comes from an ignoramus who is offering a resistance that is called resistance to demonstration, which means a guy that tries to just argue, who's just stupid, and he refuses to accept the truth, even though the truth is staring him in the face. We can all think of examples where people are so stuck in stupid ideas that even when the demonstrated fact is staring them in the face, they're still going to deny it. Thus, you can find, and this is his example, and this was the Flat Earth Society, groups of people who dispute the doctrine that the Earth is spherical and that the sphere has a circular motion, right? In other words, it's an obvious fact that the world is round and that the world goes round and round, right? And if anyone is going to, and it's obvious, it's been demonstrated. This is Rambam talking in the 11th century, right? It's so obvious that if someone tells you that it's not round and it's flat or square or whatever, then the person is obviously such an ignoramus that he refuses to accept the facts of what's actually looking at him in the face, right? So such a person, with regard to the matter of this kind, these folk do not enter, I'm not into our purpose. I'm not even talking about such people. because what's demonstrated fact is demonstrated fact, and there's no point in arguing about it. If someone's trying to argue against that, there's a bazillion examples of this all over the place. And personally, I would say, if something's scientifically established with facts, with statistics, and someone wants to deny it, then that person would fall into the category of Maimonides' ignoramus.
But
sorry, go ahead.
With faith, there's some things that we actually don't want to prove because, it's better to just believe things,
Yeah. So actually, Rambam is going to say something very similar to that. So hang in there. But that's a good point. So the things about which there is this perplexity, though, the things that which we don't know yet, right, which we're still searching, those things that, in Rambam's example, we sit around the table and we argue and debate and we create doubts in each other's opinions. Those kinds of things are very numerous in divine matters. When it comes to religious issues of godliness, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, Rambam says. There's a lot of things we're still discussing and debating and arguing about, right? But they are few, and this is fascinating because this is obviously wrong. But remember, Rambam is living at a time where he thinks he knows everything, right? We've now learned so much more that if we know anything, we know that there's still so much more for us to know, right? We put up the Hubble telescope. I remember when that went up, and we thought that's going to tell us everything, right? And now we put up a Webb telescope, and it's the whole, my goodness, wow, it's just it's so much more. In 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whoever, 100 years, people are going to go further and learn more, right? But Rambam is thinking in a time that he thought that Aristotle and Plato were the end of science, which we can't hold against him because that's what he thought. So he says, but few in matters pertaining to natural sciences, because those are all proven already. We know those things. That's done. Right, and non-existent in matters pertaining to mathematics. And when it comes to mathematics, that's clear. Mathematics are solid. That's despite the fact that, as we all know, there have been many advances in mathematics since then. I'm not a mathematician, but I know that much. But the point being, Rambam is saying that in divine matters, in religious matters, we're still debating all kinds of stuff, right? So now it gets a little bit more interesting. Alexander of Aphrodisias. Alexander was a well-known Aristotelian student who wrote commentaries on Aristotle and very well respected in the world of Aristotelians, including Rambam, who, as we know already now, was a very big follower of Aristotle. So here he's quoting one of the most important commentators on Aristotle, named Alexander of Aphrodisias, says that there are three causes of disagreement about things. When people argue, okay, so they're sitting around the table and they're debating. So there's three types of debates. Personally, I just absolutely love this. One is the love of domination and the love of strife. One is when people argue because they need to be right? Because I'm better than you, and I'm going to argue and I'm going to scream and yell until I own you, or until I show you up, or until I just, I did you in, I beat you in the argument. That's one kind of argument, right? Both of which, those things, the love to dominate others and the love to cause arguments and strife between people, they turn man aside from the apprehension of truth as it is. Those arguments, not only do such debates not accomplish the truth, they actually lead towards untruth. They lead human beings down the path towards the exact opposite of the truth. Number one. And you don't need too many examples. Just open up Facebook, Twitter, pick your favorite news organization, watch somebody yelling at someone else, and you know exactly what Rambam was talking about. Or actually, in this case, what Alexander of Aphrodisias is talking about. The second cause of disagreement among people is the subtlety and obscurity of the object of apprehension in itself and the difficulty of apprehending. In other words, it's hard. It's a very difficult subject. So people misunderstand it, or people understand it in different ways, try to explain it in different ways, and then they start arguing. In other words, it's a tough subject. We're trying to get at the truth. And note, and this type of argument can lead to the truth. Someone can figure it out. If they work really hard, they might get there, right? The third is the ignorance of him who apprehends. Sometimes a person is just, and I don't know if there's no nice way to say it, is just too stupid to get it, right? They just won't get it. his inability to grasp things that is past apprehend. So there's two people. One guy gets it, and the other guy doesn't get it. So they argue, right? The guy who just will never understand it is just going to scream, he just won't. Now, this is what Alexander mentioned. So those are the three types of arguments that Alexander of Aphrodisias delineated. But Rambam is going to add a fourth type of disagreement. However, in our times, there's a fourth cause that he did not mention because it did not exist among them. I think he was being nice because I think what Rambam is about to say probably existed forever. But okay, Rambam said that in Alexander's time, it didn't exist. And what is that? It is habit and upbringing. And I think this is related to what you mentioned before about we have a certain belief that we just believe and we won't let go. So habit and upbringing, it might not be exactly the same, but let's read it and see if you agree or not. For man has in his nature a love of an inclination for that to which he is habituated. Thus, you can see that the people of the desert, for example, let's say I grow up in the desert, notwithstanding the disorderliness of their life, right? They don't have a house. They don't have, the modern, they don't have running water. They don't have a refrigerator. Rambam's time, whatever amenities they had in cities in his day, they didn't have all of that. The lack of pleasures, the scarcity of food. They dislike towns. They don't want to live in the city, right? Because they do not hanker after the pleasures, even though it's obvious to anyone that lives in the city that there's so much good stuff here. We have a market. You can go buy what you want to eat. You can go to the you can go play a game with your friends. You can go have a meeting. You can go to shul. You can do whatever you want out there in the desert. What are you going to do? And you don't have any of those pleasures, and they prefer the bad circumstances to which they're accustomed to good ones, to which they have not accustomed. Their souls accordingly would find no repose in living in palaces, big houses, and wearing silk clothes and enjoyment of baths, ointments, and perfumes. So just like people, when they grow up and live in a certain environment, they tend to like and stick with that environment. In the same way, a man has a love for and wish to defend opinions to which he is habituated and in which he has been brought up, and has a feeling of repulsion for opinions other than those. We were raised to think a certain way, and we're going to stick with that way of thinking, right? And and if you're going to tell me, and if it's those guys' opinions, those guys that I don't like, the ones that I oppose, that I was raised to think they're the other one, I'm going to hate those opinions, right? For this reason, also, man is blind to the apprehension of the true realities and inclines toward the things to which he has habituated. He'll turn away from the truth and stick with his habit because he wants to stick with his habit, even when he's presented with something that's true. This happened to the multitude with regard to the belief in its corporality. Here the Rambam is now explaining. Remember, he goes every chapter we studied. He studied word after word after word and tried to prove to us and show us that it doesn't mean that God has a heart. God doesn't walk. He doesn't sit on a big chair. He doesn't sit in the sky and feel angry and feel all of these things. But everyone thinks that he does. Why? Because that's the way they grew up. That's what they were taught in kindergarten. And that's what they're going to stick with, right? This happened to them. That's what everyone thinks. And in many other metaphysical subjects, as we shall make clear, people think, they're brought up to think that certain metaphysical realities are the way things work. Remember, Rambam was an arch rationalist. He didn't think that there were magical powers to the mitzvot that we do. Rambam felt that the mitzvot are done in order to make ourselves better people, and that they're a guide that God gave us in order to perfect us as human beings and to perfect the world. He didn't think there was some magical thing that happens when we perform them, that we manipulate the heavens and the spheres, right? But these are things we grow up with, and they're so ingrained in us that when someone tells us what's the truth, according to Rambam, we won't listen, we won't take it. All this is due to people being habituated to and brought up on texts that it is an established usage to think highly of. And so we think so much. The Torah says, and so on, and to regard as true, and whose external meaning is indicative of the corporeality of God. So the Torah says that God had an outstretched arm. So God has an arm, right? Because we're told the Torah is holy, the Torah is God's word. The Torah says that God had an outstretched arm, so God had an outstretched arm. So this is so for reasons that I shall mention further on. I'm sorry, I skipped the line. And other imaginings with no truth in them. People imagine things because they see them in the Torah, even though there's no truth in them, because they have been written in a way of parables and riddles, which I will say later. Now, you and I in my class, because I've been jumping back and forth, we've already jumped forward to some of the places where Rambam explains why the Torah talks in parables and riddles. But that's because I've been giving you hints as to what's to come, and I've been jumping ahead just to keep things interesting. But do not think that what we have said with regard to the insufficiency of the human intellect and it's having a limit at which it stops is a statement made in order to conform to law, right? For it is something that has already been said and truly grasped by the philosophers without there having concern for a particular doctrine or opinion. In other words, I'm not saying like this because I'm trying to teach you Torah. I'm saying it like this because it's a scientific fact, right? Torah or not, what I just told you about people's pursuit of knowledge and people's unwillingness to accept the truth because of the reasons which we stated, right, are something that the philosophers have already been grasped. Remember, he quoted Alexander of Aphrodisias to prove his point. And it is a true thing that cannot be doubted except by, the only person who's going to doubt it is an individual who's ignorant of what I've already just taught you, right? If you want to be an ignoramus and say that the world is not round and it's flat, well, fine, then you can, whatever. I can't really talk to you, right? We have put this chapter together before others. The reason why I plunked this in the middle here is only with the view to serving as an introduction to that which come after it. Now you'll understand basically what I'm dealing with as I continue, and Rambam is about to continue going through terms, but he has a little bit more. He's going to get back to, but we'll see in the next few chapters. This is more than enough for tonight, but I'm putting this in here because I want you to be able to understand the rest, and you can't understand the rest without understanding, number one, the desire and the drive for knowledge that we innately have as human beings, and those things that hamper that desire for truth. Those things, whether it's habit, whether it's ignorance, whether it's the love of domination and strife, those are the kinds of things that keep us away from accepting the truth. And Helene, thank you for raising that issue of maybe people won't accept the truth because of fear. I think that's part of the fourth thing that Rambam introduced. It's fear because when you let go of the things that you're used to and you know, right, and you're familiar with and you're comfortable with for another truth that contradicts what you've always thought, people are afraid to do that. And fear is probably what drives the fourth idea that Rambam said. Thank you for bringing fear up, because I think that's a very good point. So I think that's more than enough for tonight. Remember, we covered a lot of things just really quick. We covered the meaning of the term sorrow, etzev. We covered the meaning of the term achal, to eat, right? And remember, sorrow, according to Rambam, meant rebellion against God, and God's heart just means that he didn't warn us, right? Achal, to eat, doesn't mean to eat or drink. It usually, I mean, it can mean that, but that's its real meaning, but it usually means to consume knowledge, right? And or it could mean to destroy, depending on the context. And then we studied the various reasons why a person argues over now when there's knowledge out there that is to be learned, how we can achieve it when we pursue the truth for the truth's sake, and the various reasons why people refuse to do that. I'll open the floor for any comments. And
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
These various words we've been reviewing, is there any organization? Is there any reason why they're in this order? And this seems rather a random selection. I'm sure I'm missing something.
It's pretty random, but there is some order. Like I did point out a few lectures ago that of the chapter in Shemos, right, the encounter between Moshe and God on the mountain, where God told Moshe, "You can't see my face, but you can only see behind me." Every difficult phrase in that chapter, Rambam took those words. So that's one organizing principle. He took words that appear in that chapter. He also, there's a very strong focus on words that pop up in Bereshit, in Genesis, in general. We find constantly, and in a large sense, that's because there's a ton of anthropomorphisms in Bereshit. But in general, it seems to just jump all around. And remember, Rambam told us in the beginning that he's going to do that. It's going to be disorganized, right? And it's there is a purpose to all this, but there is a reason for why he ordered things, but it's very unclear as to what that reason is. And he does jump from thing to thing and back and forth and so on, which is just simply the way the book is written. Yeah, but this is a good question, but I don't think there's an order to the words other than what I said, I think. Any other questions or observations?
Yesher koach.
Thank you. Bartia. Be blessed.
Yeshivas.
I hope next week we'll continue. I might jump. I have a couple topics that I might cover. I'll jump around just like Rambam jumped around. But the one thing I promise is that each lecture, I'm going to move forward in the text. So we will continue our forward movement through the actual text. But whether or not I spend the second half jump into a topic, I'll decide every week a little different. Okay, I think that'll cover for the evening. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it, and everyone have a great Shabbos, a great week, and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. God bless everyone. Shabbat shalom. Thank you. Better late than never, right, Saul?
Yep.